get set up here real quick. When I ponder the name Next Generation Service Corps, I interpret it as saying this is the core group of people that will serve as the next generation of activists, changing the world for the better. And as someone who loves being of service to others, I love doing activism. It's literally a dream come true to be standing here addressing this group of students. Spreading anti-racism is my passion, but that doesn't mean it's not intimidating, that it's not taxing. And I want to thank everyone here today for being here today, because your face will be part of what keeps me from quitting, from running away, from canceling the next event, because I always have to overcome self-doubt that never goes away. Special shout out to the LGBTQIA+ committee for inviting me to speak. And I want everybody to know Marissa Gomez is the reason I'm here today. Sis, you made this happen. Thank you so much. Today's speech is titled Permission to Believe in Better. And I aim to speak in a way that urges everyone to form a deeper connection with their emotions. I will illustrate that vulnerability is a gift you grant yourself, not something you give to someone else. And learning to decipher emotions and to be comfortable with vulnerability will maximize your potential to serve the world. So, who is Evan Moss? Above all, I'm a father of 2 sons. Brixton is 5, and Hendrix is 3. Secondly, I'm a husband. I'm excited to celebrate my 6th wedding anniversary in a couple weeks. And then last, third, before being an uncle, before being a Carnegie Mellon graduate, before being an Apple employee, I am an activist. And that's not a hat that I put on when the moment suits me. Activism is a lifestyle that I aim to live out every moment of every day. And it's been about 4 years since I garnered enough conviction to act on my activist intuition. And it's amazing how now, when I imagine the future, everything that I'm excited about is somehow tied to my activist journey. I focus on anti-racism because race is the aspect of my identity that is attacked the most. But my strategies for using emotions and vulnerability to diminish social bigotry can be applied to whatever form, or whatever ism or phobia matters to you. Social problems like racism, heterosexism, or ableism are products of individuals being more willing to use our differences as justification to disconnect instead of motivation to engage. The more comfortable you are at challenging your own understanding of how deeply you can connect with someone else, the more capable you will be at inspiring a more harmonious society. Gil Scott-Heron, anybody know him? One of my favorite singers and poets. He popularized the phrase, "The revolution will not be televised." He wasn't suggesting that TV networks wouldn't broadcast the content. Instead, he was saying that before the world can experience a revolution, change has to first take place, and change has to first happen in places that cameras can't see. For society to experience a revolution, change has to first happen in the hearts and minds of its individuals. And given how obvious the world's problems are, it's amazing to me how allergic people are to the word change. Every time I say the word activism, it's like somebody's just compelled to word vomit all their reminders about how slow change is, all their excuses for believing activism is too hard, all of their justification for being silent. And it's easy to align with popular perspectives like these until you realize that the reality you live is a direct product of the perspectives you choose. Try not to break this desk, I'm holding it so hard. It is a life skill to be able to shift your perspective until you find one that empowers and enables you. The more you hone this skill, the more control you're able to exercise over your own life. And unlike gifts, skills have to be developed with intentionality over time. And instead of dwelling on the times when change was slow and costly, I choose to prioritize the times when change happened in my life that was meaningful and lasting. And sometimes it doesn't always take long, and it's not always painful. I often revisit a conversation I had a few years back with Layla, my gay brother-in-law's lesbian best friend. I share with her that while I felt very strongly that same-sex couples should have the right to marry, I couldn't defend a stance for or against same-sex couples raising kids. Layla paused for maybe 2 seconds and calmly asked, if one woman can raise a son to be a man, why can't two? And whereas she could have been defensive or argumentative, her emotional awareness and willingness to be vulnerable helped me understand and experience I will never live. Having been raised by a single mother, the truth of her words destroyed the barriers within my mind, freeing my awareness to discover other simple truths about love and life that now serve as justification for behaving differently, for voting differently, for protesting differently. My anti-racism platform is named Let's Talk About Race. Despite the fact that I spent the first 30 years of my life saying crazy things like, I don't talk about race to white folks. That was me. Somebody recognized that. Thank you for laughing. But on May 25th, 2020, while trying not to catch COVID, while raising a 2-year-old with no childcare, while trying to manage my tech career, while also supporting my wife's tech career, and during our second pregnancy, the news of George Floyd's demise broke me in a way that I had never experienced. For the whole of my life, it had been fine for the not black people around me to not understand my black experiences. I had long accepted that part of my existence would always be invisible to the white family I had married. But the possibility of my kids being unseen by the people they loved the most, that was simply too much. And upon realizing this, I came to understand that silence is complicity. I haven't been the same since my wife broke the news with 3 simple words. Could y'all hear my voice change just now? Every time I think about it, like my face changes, my throat changes. I remember the moment where she said, they killed him. And for the first few weeks, it didn't matter if I was discussing dinner options with Sydney or reading my toddler a bedtime story or answering a technical call, a technical question on a work call. If I let too many words slip out of my mouth without pausing to brace my torso, I simply doubled over and dissolved into tears. And whereas I usually took great pride in my emotional stability, my emotions were so big and so uncontrollable that nothing felt stable. Joy and guilt became synonymous, and the intensity of my emotions battered me into a numbed silence. I hunted a house like this for several days before my wife pulled me aside and asked, why are you behaving like this? And as I stood there struggling to answer, I began to understand the true detriment of willfully agreeing not to talk about my otherness, not to talk about race for so long. Not talking about race hadn't spared me from experiencing racism. Instead, it spared me from learning to effectively express my racial thoughts through words. In the same way that your perspective limits your reality, awareness limits your ability to be creative and innovative. And it's almost impossible to have any meaningful awareness regarding things you don't discuss openly. It's hard to be what you cannot see. That's a perspective that exemplifies the importance of representation. Similarly, the phrase, it's hard to say words you've never heard, exemplifies the importance of conversation. Failing to have dialogue about a given subject only limits how many words you can utilize when it's you that needs to talk. This is true not just for conversations you have with other people, but also the conversations that you have with yourself. So let's talk about race, about everything, not because it's the right thing to do. I don't do this because it's the right thing to do. For me, activism is not about doing the right thing. I do this because expanding your awareness opens you to experience more of life's beauty. Tell that kid to wake up. Gotcha. I'm sorry, that was mean. I like your necktie in the red. I meant to tell you that. We can keep going. I spent my whole life believing emotions should either be controlled and diminished or avoided altogether until my emotions were so unavoidably disruptive and so mentally engulfing that I felt diminished. I had never used words like panicky or anxious or disheartened to describe myself. And in the midst of everything happening in 2020, My surface level understanding of of the emotions flooding my mind left me incapable of using words to escape the isolation of silence. I realized all of this to some degree while standing in my kitchen staring into my white wife's green eyes. Her lack of melanin was no longer a valid excuse for believing she couldn't understand my human experience. So I locked myself in my bedroom and I literally stared at a wall for several hours and I meditated on the question, what do you feel? Evan, what do you feel? And I meditated and asked that question over and over until I heard the most honest, most vulnerable story I'd ever allowed myself to tell. When I shared it with my wife, instead of responding with the typical, I don't understand what you're going through, but I'm here to support, she hugged me and said, that makes perfect sense, and we cried together. So my home life was on the path to recovery, but I still sucked at work. I was still struggling at my job. And so with my wife's help, I turned my deeply personal reflections into a 45-minute keynote presentation. And then I invited my manager and the next 7 people that I worked with the most to a video conference. And what do you call a meeting where you plan to share the most emotion-filled story you've ever told with the people who control your career? Let's Talk About Race was literally the only thing I could come up with. And here's what I've learned since I started taking my own advice. Silence is complicity. I'll say that several times. Silence is complicity. And it is critical that everyone learns to use their natural gifts, their natural born talents and abilities to protest in their own personalized, specialized way. I expected that first hour-long meeting with 8 people to cost me my job. But when I realized releasing my story into the world relieved the pressure I felt within, I blindly agreed. I blindly decided to present Let's Talk About Race every Wednesday and Friday during my lunch. And what I thought would be a one-time thing turned into my own personal protest. You can never know the value of a story until you allow it to be heard. Everyone knows that the most powerful stories come from the heart, but we tend to ignore this when it's our heart that needs to be heard. I devalued my own story so much that I struggled to share it with my wife until I chose the perspective that there is value in our shared humanity, and I sought to define this value. I sought to see and experience this value by sharing my story as widely as possible. In the first 3 months, at least 3,000 unique logins joined my bi-weekly video calls. This included vice presidents from Apple, students in Brazil, engineers in London, church groups in Ohio, and now, the only part of my story that I really struggle to articulate, that I really struggle to express, is how freeing it is to be able to see myself in the reflection of everyone around me. Now I understand that at their root, emotions are data that deserve your time and attention. The answers to your life's questions might be hiding in the emotions that you have not processed. For example, I didn't value sadness until I realized it indicates areas of my life that need more attention. Anger was explicitly a negative experience until I realized it highlights personal boundaries that I wasn't aware of. Emotions are the non-physical part of yourself expressing itself through your body, and learning to decipher these signals from the universe will help you move through the world as a more complete and whole version of yourself. Most people have an incomplete understanding of what vulnerability offers, and often assume emotions should follow logic. Such beliefs cause us to mislabel unexpected outcomes as proof that we should not have been vulnerable. Learning to sit with your discomfort long enough for it to teach you something is how you translate life surprises into truths about your reality, truths that enable you to be more intentional in your pursuit of success, whatever that may be. The first time I experienced racism in the workplace, I didn't have the emotional stamina to advocate for myself. I literally couldn't think of enough words to advocate for myself. I thought in that moment, Evan, it'll take you 30 minutes to express this thought, but you only have 2 minutes of patience right now. Evan, if you even open your mouth, you're gonna lose everything, you're gonna lose this job. And now, I fly across the country facilitating conversations about race for hundreds of people at a time. I thought I was doing this to protect my kids or to benefit the world, but when I realized that connecting with dissimilar people diminishes my own limiting beliefs, activism became a way to regain the freedom that was being stolen by perspectives I used to choose. Before you consider yourself exempt from a social issue or too different from someone else to connect, consider a reality where the problem is as bad as the stereotypes suggest. Or consider a reality where someone else's truth is your own. Before you celebrate a hero or condemn a villain, ask yourself, what would trigger you to do what they've done? This is how you shift from thinking you need to live someone else's experience to understanding the value of our shared humanity. Before you decide there's nothing you can do, consider this. Everything I've shared with you comes from countless hours of self-reflection. I didn't study this. I don't have any formal training on public speaking. I didn't study history or culture in college. I did everything I could to avoid those classes. And yet, I know for a fact that my words have been used to inspire many companies, multiple companies, big companies that you heard of before, to improve their hiring practices and to update their codes of conduct. Last February, I spoke with the Oakland Rotary Club, and the conversation workshop that I did there concluded in $10,000. They pledged a $10,000 scholarship for minority students in Oakland. This past week, I celebrated the 150th member joining a employee resource group for Black employees that I created at Apple. That's a huge win for me. In that same employee resource group, we celebrated Martin Luther King's birthday by announcing for the second year in a row, we're giving out $30,000 to send students to the National Society of Black Engineers annual conference. In the last 2 years, I've given out $70,000 with no training. Today, I'm in Arizona. This summer, I'm delivering a keynote speech at a Juneteenth conference in Chicago. And while I know I will never be able to truly quantify the impact of my efforts, I know it's already exceeded far beyond anything I ever would have believed when I got started. And with that in mind, I pose the question, how much better would the world be if everyone in this room also believed in better?